When the Pilgrims arrived in this country, they were grateful to find native winter squash. This vegetable was perfect for them because it provided delicious food for them, but it also stored very well through the long, cold winters. Squash can be unwieldy, have different sizes, sometimes it's hard to work with. They have a tough outer skin. They have a very heavy, bright yellow to orange flesh that is really sweet once it's cooked, and they also have edible seeds, making them a great food. Now, winter squash has been around for a long time. We can show through history that it was eaten as early as 5500 BC in Mexico. Squash grows on vines, and winter squash is picked when it's mature at about 3 months after it's been growing. It's different than its cousin, the summer squash, which has a lot of moisture in it. Now, these vegetables are very best picked in the fall after the cold weather has set in. I want to show you some of the varieties. There's a plethora of varieties of squash available. This particular one is the butternut squash, and you'll notice that it's a very orange flesh with a really light tan colored skin. This skin is actually easier to work with than some, but you'll notice that the seeds are just at the very end of this particular squash. Very sweet, flavorful squash. The acorn squash is shaped like an acorn, and it ranges in color from the dark green to the orange to a really splashy mix of the two, with a lighter orange colored flesh in this particular squash. Then we have the giant banana squash, and you'll notice that it's got more of a yellow flesh with a pinkish exterior. And this particular squash is often what you find in the grocery store, cut into slabs and covered with plastic, because it's easy to sell in slabs. It's a giant squash, and most people don't purchase it that way because it's a little hard to work with, but they cut it up and sell it in sections. We also have a couple of other squashes, including the buttercup squash, and this is a nice little size squash with a brilliant orange interior with a little bit different texture. This particular squash is very sweet, and there are a couple of varieties. Another variety of this squash is the kabocha squash, and it is a much larger squash with, again, the very bright orange center that's particularly sweet. Another squash that's pretty easy to work with is the small delicata, and these range from orange to yellow to white. Oftentimes they'll have green stripes as well. A very small squash, easier to work with for to eat individually. We also have the beautiful Turk's turban squash. As you can see, it's just a beautiful squash. It looks like it's a hat. Very fancy looking squash that has a lighter green interior, a lighter orange interior. This particular one is a little bit more mild, isn't quite as sweet and tasty as some, but they're all delicious. We also have a small sweet dumpling squash here, and there are a couple of different ones. You'll see that it's just a nice small portion individually for people to eat as well. And then lastly, a very different squash than the others is the spaghetti squash. And it looks about the same with a light yellow interior, but once you cook this, the fibers become almost stringy like spaghetti, and I'm going to show you what to do with some of that. Now, what do you need to know when you go to purchase squash? Well, you want to make sure that it has a very hard exterior, that it's very, very firm. It doesn't matter if it's got some rough areas. This is where it's been laying on the soil, and that's not a problem at all unless it's soft and there's some mold growing on that. So this is a really great way to determine how to purchase the squash. Now, when you think about squash and this very hard exterior, it gives you an indication that it can store for a long time, and I mentioned that's why the Pilgrims really liked it. So when you buy squash, which you should be buying now, it's in season. This is the time of year to get the winter squash. When you buy it, you can store it for a long period of time. If you store it in a cool place, like in a cellar at about 60 degrees, it will last for many, many months. Once you cut the squash open, it's only going to, well, you need to refrigerate it, and it will keep in your refrigerator for 3 or 4 days. After that, you're going to want to make sure you cook it up. How do you do that when you're managing a giant squash? Well, you want to cut that up and freeze it or preserve it in some other way. So squash, the plethora, the variety is beautiful, and they're all delicious, as Tammy's going to show you.
It might seem pretty overwhelming to try to turn one of these Hubbard squashes into dinner, but it's really not that hard. And as Janet mentioned, there are lots of different sizes and shapes of squash, but there are also a big variety of how easy they are to cut into. For example, these delicata squashes, it's real easy to just cut them in half, just as long as you have a real sharp knife. Okay, and then the butternut squash works pretty well to just peel with a vegetable peeler. And they have a pretty hard outside, but it does peel off. Now I wouldn't recommend this method with the squash that's more ridged on the outside, like some of these others. That's just too hard to do that. And so the other thing that you can do is, if you're trying to break this one apart, you really need a sharp knife, and it can actually be kind of dangerous to try to cut them up. And so sometimes that takes a little bit of creativity. Some of these you can microwave just a little bit or bake for a little while until the outside starts to get a little bit softened, cool them off a little bit, and then cut them up. Or you can use a saw. If you know someone who has a sharp saw, that will work too. But you can also use a little bit more creativity than that, and you can drop them, and that works pretty well too. Once you've got the squash cut into manageable pieces, a size that will fit into your oven or even into your microwave, there are a couple of different ways you can cook them. And the first would be, you could microwave it. That's probably my least favorite way to do it, but it is a quick way to cook squash. I like to bake it in the oven because it just gives a little bit more of a roasted flavor. And two ways to do that. First of all, preheat your oven to about 400 degrees. And then the first way is you can just sprinkle a little bit of olive oil on, and I'm going to show you a different way, but you could just sprinkle that on and open bake that, open roast it without a cover on, and that will give you some of the caramelized parts on the squash that taste really good. But I like to just add about maybe a half cup of water to the pan and then cover it with foil so that keeps the moisture in. And then bake it for, probably this size would take about maybe an hour and 15 minutes. If you were baking a squash about this size, it maybe would take 30 minutes to 45 minutes at 400 degrees. Once you have all this squash cooked, there are lots of different ways that you can serve it. An easy way is just to cut it into wedges and just put it on platters so that people can just take one serving at a time. This has got a little bit of parsley on. You can drizzle it with a little olive oil or butter. This has a little bit of sage on it. This one I've cubed up and sprinkled it with cinnamon and a little bit of sugar, put a little butter on that. Another really easy way to do it, to cook squash, is just scoop it out of the shell. This is butternut squash, and then just mash it up a little bit. And so it's real important to have it well cooked so it's soft and mashes easily. And then I just like to add some butter and some salt and pepper. If you want to thin it down a little bit when you mash it like this, you can add a little bit of milk or cream, or if you're wanting to put some of the sweeter spices like cinnamon or nutmeg or even apple pie seasoning, something like that, you could thin it down with a little bit of orange juice or apple juice to just give it a little bit of a fruity flavor. This is one of my favorites, to just add some Parmesan cheese into it. That makes a really nice side dish.
I'm going to show you a really simple way to use spaghetti squash, and it's delicious. You just start by putting some mushrooms in a bowl, sliced mushrooms, about 2 cups, about 2 tablespoons of butter or olive oil, whichever you choose, and about a 1/4 cup of chopped onions. And I'm just going to put that in the microwave for 5 minutes, and I'm going to stir that about halfway through. Once the mushrooms are tender, they're ready to be added to this recipe. And again, you can either cook these in the microwave or saute them if you want, but today I'm just into doing something easy. Okay, what you're going to do is you're going to take your spaghetti squash that has already been cooked, like any other squash, until it's tender, 400 degrees, for about 45 minutes to an hour. And you'll notice spaghetti squash has a different texture. It actually looks like spaghetti, hence the name. All you do is simply scoop the squash out of the shells. Comes out really easy if it's been cooked long enough. And I like to use an entire squash for this. The squashes get a little bit fragile and will crack a little bit, but they're still pretty easy to come out of there. You can see it comes out almost clean. So here you have your spaghetti squash. You add your mushroom mixture. And if you don't like mushrooms, just try onion, try garlic, something that any other vegetables that you may like. I like to add a little bit of parsley, about 2 tablespoons. And then you can either add chives, or if you don't have chives, green onions work really well here. And then about a 1/4 cup of Parmesan cheese. Then I like to add some salt and pepper. Just simply stir this up, mix it up, and you have a very delicious dish. Another use of spaghetti squash is to turn it into your dinner. I just simply take the spaghetti fibers from the squash, add a heaping pile to my plate, kind of break that up a little bit, and then I like to add a little bit of marinara sauce to that. Any kind works well, whatever flavor you like. Add some nice hot marinara sauce. Maybe put a little bit of Parmesan cheese on that. Serve it with a salad and some crusty bread, and you have dinner. If you have any leftover squash, you can take your leftover squash. Here I have some spaghetti squash, and you can simply, again, remove all of the squash, and then you can store it in bags and put it in Ziploc bags and put it in the freezer. This works really well for if you cook a whole big Hubbard squash, for example, you're going to have a lot of leftover squash. So put it in the freezer, smash the bags down, and then put this in the fridge in the morning before you go to school or to work, and when you come home it's thawed and it's ready to make a beautiful meal from.